She believed love was supposed to feel safe, not exciting, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of love that lets your shoulders drop after a long day. The kind that feels like coming home, even if you've never been there before. She met him in a season of her life when she wasn't looking for anything. And maybe that's why it felt real. He listened when she spoke, not just waited for his turn. He actually listened. When she laughed, he smiled like he had been waiting for that sound. When she went quiet, he didn't rush her. He felt calm, reliable, grounded, and in a world where everything felt uncertain, he felt like something she could lean on. She didn't know much about his past, but he never volunteered details, and she didn't push. Some people call that mystery. Some people call it privacy. At the time, she called it respect. At night, she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his voice in her head. The way he said her name, the way he paused before answering questions. She told herself, this is what grown love feels like. And somewhere deep inside, a very quiet voice whispered, be careful. But it was too soft to hear, and she was too warm to listen. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a story that would cost her more than she imagined. He wasn't always available, but when he was fully there. No phone in his hand, no distracted glances, no half answers. He remembered small things, the coffee she liked, the song she skipped every time it came on. He never rushed intimacy, never pushed, never crossed lines without asking. That mattered to her. It made her feel chosen, not used. Sometimes he would disappear for a day, sometimes two. When he came back, he didn't over-explain, just said he was busy, and she believed him, because his absence never felt cruel. It felt necessary. She told herself, everyone has a life. She liked that he didn't cling, that he didn't demand explanations from her either. It felt equal, balanced. Friends asked questions she brushed away. Is he serious about you? Why haven't we met him? She smiled and said, he's just private. What she didn't say, what she barely admitted to herself, was that sometimes, when she talked about the future, he went quiet, not defensive, not angry, just distant, like someone standing near a door they hadn't decided to open. She noticed it, and then she learned how not to. Because love felt too rare to risk with questions. There were questions she never asked. Not because she didn't think of them, but because something in his eyes asked her not to. Where he went late at night. Why weekends were complicated. Why holidays felt unavailable. He never lied outright. He just redirected. Changed the subject, smiled, touched her hand, and somehow, that was enough. She learned his moods, the way his voice shifted when she stepped too close to certain topics. She learned when to stop talking, when to let silence protect whatever this was. At night, when she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, she wondered who else knew this version of him. And then she hated herself for wondering, because love wasn't supposed to interrogate. Love was supposed to trust. Still, some nights felt lonelier than being alone. She would turn slightly toward him, wanting to ask one simple question. Is there something you're not telling me? But the words stayed trapped behind her teeth, because she was afraid of the answer, and even more afraid of what asking might break. The doubt didn't arrive loudly. It didn't crash through her thoughts or demand attention. It slipped in quietly. One afternoon, they were walking side by side, their hands almost touching. Her phone buzzed, a message from a friend asking to finally meet him. She laughed and showed him the screen. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Maybe another time. he said gently. Too gently. And for the first time, his voice sounded rehearsed. She nodded. Of course she did. But something inside her shifted. Not enough to leave. Not enough to confront. Just enough to notice. That night, she stood in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, watching her own reflection. She looked happy. Truly. And yet, there was a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Love doesn't always leave. Sometimes it just becomes distant. She told herself she was imagining things. She always did. That night, he held her like always. Carefully. Gently. But something was missing. Not love. Presence. She lay awake, staring into the dark, listening to the space between his breaths. And for the first time, she wondered if she was loving someone who wasn't fully there. She didn't know it yet. But the silence she felt beside him was already telling the truth. At first, she couldn't name what had changed. Nothing was wrong. That was the problem. He still texted good morning, still asked how her day was, still kissed her forehead when he arrived. But something essential was missing. Like music playing, with one note slightly off. He listened less with his eyes now, more with polite patience. When she spoke, he nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence, just to see if he noticed. He didn't. Not because he didn't care, because he was tired, or distracted, or carrying something he couldn't set down. She told herself all the reasonable things. People get busy, relationships change. This is normal. But late at night, alone with her thoughts, she asked a quieter question. Why do I feel like I'm talking to someone who's already gone? She didn't say it out loud. She learned how to swallow questions gracefully. Silence didn't arrive suddenly. It grew, like a shadow stretching longer each evening. They still talked. About errands, about work, about weather, but not about them. Conversations ended sooner now. Laughter faded faster. Sometimes she caught herself filling the quiet, asking questions she didn't care about, just to feel close again. He answered kindly, briefly, as if conserving energy. One night she reached for his hand. He held it, but his grip was absent-minded, like someone holding on to something while thinking of something else entirely. That night, lying beside him, she felt a strange grief, not for what they had lost, but for what she felt slipping away, without ever being acknowledged. Silence is gentle that way. It doesn't announce itself, it just replaces things. She started editing herself, not consciously, carefully. She avoided topics that made his shoulders tense. She softened questions before asking them. She laughed sooner, just in case silence followed. She became good at reading the room. Too good. Somewhere along the way, she stopped sharing her fears, her dreams, the small stories that once filled the space between them. Not because he told her to stop, because she felt like they landed nowhere. She wondered when love turned into consideration, when speaking freely started to feel selfish. At night, she lay awake beside him, her thoughts louder than ever. She imagined saying everything, and then imagined his face, and stayed quiet, because peace felt easier than truth. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No tension, no warning. They were standing in line at a grocery store. She leaned closer, playfully, and whispered something meant only for him. He smiled. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and something changed, just for a second. His jaw tightened. His eyes shifted away from her. He stepped slightly aside. Not much, but enough. Enough that she felt it. He didn't answer the message. Didn't explain. Just put the phone back in his pocket and continued talking. Too normally. She nodded. smiled, but inside her chest, something went very still. Because in that one quiet second, she realized, there's a part of his life that does not include me. She didn't confront him, didn't ask, didn't accuse. She simply stood there, holding a truth she wasn't ready to name. The truth doesn't rush. It waits. After that day, everything felt heavier. She noticed patterns she once ignored. How he avoided calls at certain hours. How weekends belonged to someone else. How the future was always spoken of. Vaguely. She stopped asking herself if something was wrong. She asked how long it had been wrong. Still, she stayed. Not because she was weak. Because hope is persuasive. Because leaving without proof feels like betrayal of your own heart. Some nights, she cried quietly in the bathroom. Other nights, she lay beside him, pretending sleep came easily. Love doesn't always leave. Sometimes it just becomes pain you learn to carry. Alone. One night, as he slept beside her, his phone lit up on the table. She didn't touch it. Didn't move. She just watched the screen fade back to black and understood something terrifyingly simple. She didn't need proof anymore. She needed courage. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she stopped protecting his silence. She didn't plan the conversation. There was no speech, no list of accusations, no anger rehearsed in the mirror. It happened on a quiet evening. They were sitting across from each other, the space between them heavy but familiar. She looked at him longer than usual, not searching, not hoping, just seeing. And then she asked very softly, "Is there something about your life I don't know?" The room didn't change, but he did. His breath paused, just for a moment, long enough to tell her everything. He didn't deny it, didn't deflect. He looked tired, older than she had ever seen him. "Yes," he said. And in that single word, the story she believed in quietly collapsed. He spoke slowly, as if choosing words that wouldn't wound, knowing they would anyway. He told her about the woman he had never left, about the home that existed parallel to this one, about the child, a small life that depended on him, that called him father. She listened without interrupting, not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside her went very quiet. Every absence suddenly had a name, every silence, an explanation. The weekends, the holidays, the distance. It wasn't confusion, it was division. He hadn't lived one life. He had split himself between two. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. And she believed him. That was the cruelest part. Because love built on protection is still a lie. And lies, even gentle ones, still take something from you. She thought she would cry. She didn't. She felt something else. A strange, hollow clarity. Like finally waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't rage. It was grief. For the future she imagined. For the honesty she offered freely. For the part of herself that waited so patiently. She realized something painful. She hadn't been loved wrongly. She had been loved partially. And partial love still feels like love until you need all of it. She stood up slowly, not running, not dramatic, just finished. She didn't beg him to choose, didn't ask him to explain more. Some truths don't require details. She gathered her things slowly, paused once, just long enough to feel everything. Then she said, "I wish you had trusted me with the truth." Not angrily, honestly. He nodded, because there was nothing left to defend. She walked out into the night, and for the first time in a long while, the air felt real. Healing didn't come quickly. Some mornings she reached for her phone out of habit. Some nights the silence felt too loud. But slowly, Her breath returned to her. She noticed how much space honesty creates. How peace feels different when it doesn't depend on someone else. She didn't regret loving him. She regretted staying silent for so long. Because silence, she learned, is also a decision, and it always costs something. She's wiser now. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. She knows this. Love requires presence, not promises. Truth delayed often hurts more than truth spoken early. And if someone asks you to accept half of a life, they are asking you to disappear quietly. She didn't disappear. She walked away whole. And somewhere ahead, there is a love that doesn't hide.